This is an MSNBC special presentation.
I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified.
This is a moment that is going to galvanize the nation.
I believed he was going to rape me. Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling.
I am innocent of this charge.
Have you ever covered Dr. Ford's mouth with your hand?
No.
Judge Kavanaugh, will you support an FBI investigation right now?
If you wanted an FBI investigation, you could have come to us.
You have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy.
The details about that night that bring me here today are the ones I will never forget.
Did you watch Dr. Ford's testimony?
I did not.
Dr. Ford, with what degree of certainty do you believe Brett Kavanaugh assaulted you?
100%.
This is our special coverage of Judgment Day in the United States Senate, the Kavanaugh confirmation hearing, using our team of NBC News reporters and MSNBC experts to cover this story tonight, including NBC News' Hallie Jackson, Casey Hunt, Andrea Mitchell, Pete Williams, John Meacham, Senate Judiciary Committee expert Lisa Graves, and NPR's Nina Totenberg. America stopped and watched history made today in a hearing room in the Dirksen Senate office building. When history is made in Senate hearing rooms, it's almost always ugly history. It is almost always the investigation of scandalous accusations that have rocked Washington and the country, and so it was today. Every senator goes to Washington hoping to make history by passing landmark legislation, preferably with their name on it, legislation that continues to shape American life long after they are gone. But sometimes senators are forced to make history in ways that some of them would like to avoid, as appeared to be the case today with the Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee when they handed over their role as questioners for more than half of the hearing to someone who never worked in the Senate before today. Arizona's Maricopa County sex crimes prosecutor Rachel Mitchell took over for every single Republican senator when their turn came to question Dr. Christine Blasey Ford about her accusation of sexual assault against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. That has never happened in a Senate confirmation hearing in the history of the Senate. The Senate has never seen a hearing like the Ford versus Kavanaugh hearing that we saw today. It was the second time in Senate history that a Supreme Court confirmation has been knocked off course by sexual misconduct allegations, but today's allegations are much worse than what we heard 27 years ago when Professor Anita Hill told the Judiciary Committee about sexual harassment that she said Clarence Thomas committed against her. Clarence Thomas entered those hearings with the likely support of about 90 senators. In the end, he was confirmed by a vote of 52 to 48. Brett Kavanaugh entered today's hearing with the likely support of only about 51 senators. And it seemed right after Dr. Ford testified today that the Kavanaugh nomination might be a lost cause. There were reports of grim pessimism from the White House. But then Brett Kavanaugh began his testimony with a mix of sharp, loud anger and tears. And Republican senators started to feel safe enough in that hearing room to actually ask their own questions, most of which were speeches in support of Brett Kavanaugh. 22 witnesses testified in the Anita Hill versus Clarence Thomas hearings. Senators agreed then that gathering evidence beyond the testimony of the nominee and one of his accusers was necessary. Not today. Republicans who control the committee did not seek and would not allow the testimony of anyone other than Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. And so it was, from start to finish, a credibility contest between two people. Some Democrats told Dr. Ford, "I believe you." And most Republicans essentially said the same thing to Judge Kavanaugh. It takes 11 votes to pass Judge Kavanaugh's nomination out of the Judiciary Committee. That vote is currently scheduled for tomorrow morning. There is only one Republican on the Judiciary Committee who has indicated in any way that he might not vote for Brett Kavanaugh. Only one vote is in doubt in the committee. That is Arizona's retiring Republican Senator Jeff Flake. The Judiciary Committee has 11 Republicans, 10 Democrats, and so tonight, the committee vote on Brett Kavanaugh is all up to Jeff Flake. If Jeff Flake votes no, along with all of the Democrats, then the Kavanaugh nomination will be defeated in the Judiciary Committee. But that does not mean the end of the road for Brett Kavanaugh. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell could still bring the nomination to the Senate floor for a full vote, even if the Judiciary Committee has voted against recommending that confirmation. We will be reviewing the testimony of Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh throughout this hour. Here is some of what they had to say.
Brett and Mark came into the bedroom and locked the door behind them. There was music playing in the bedroom. It was turned up louder by either Brett or Mark once we were in the room. I was pushed onto the bed, and Brett got on top of me. He began running his hands over my body and grinding into me. I yelled, hoping that someone downstairs might hear me, and I tried to get away from him, but his weight was heavy. Brett groped me and tried to take off my clothes. He had a hard time because he was very inebriated, and because I was wearing a one-piece bathing suit underneath my clothing. I believed he was going to rape me.
I was not at the party described by Dr. Ford. This confirmation process has become a national disgrace. The Constitution gives the Senate an important role in the confirmation process, but you have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy. I'm here today to tell the truth. I've never sexually assaulted anyone, not in high school, not in college, not ever. Sexual assault is horrific.
We begin with reports from Casey Hunt, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent and host of KCDC on Capitol Hill, and Hallie Jackson, chief White House correspondent for NBC News and MSNBC at the White House tonight. Casey, let's start with you. I know you managed to speak to Senator Jeff Flake tonight, the key vote on the Senate Judiciary Committee. What do we know?
That's right, Lawrence. We know that he is not saying right now which way he is going to make up his mind. When I spoke to him, he was visibly in turmoil. He talked a little bit about how he couldn't decide he's right, she's wrong, she's right, he's wrong, and how that was, he framed it really as though it was an impossible choice. And he, as you pointed out at the top of the show, is really the person who all eyes are going to be on tomorrow in this committee vote, because he does sit on this committee. As you know, he is not running for re-election. He has been a sharp critic of President Trump, but there are also some Democrats who've criticized him for not taking enough action to oppose the president. So that's going to be the vice that he's in. All of his colleagues on the one side versus, you know, what are his chances for the future on the other. And then the other two people that we are still closely watching, and they took very circuitous routes out of this Capitol tonight, Lawrence. I mean, you have been in this building. You know that the basement is something of a maze. Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins actually going across the Capitol through the House of Representatives to avoid reporters who are trying to find out what they think. They had met with Flake and with Senator Joe Manchin earlier in the evening before all the Republicans got together to talk about what to do. There weren't any conclusions coming out of that meeting. And I have to say, the sort of arc that you described is exactly how the mood unfolded here on the Hill. In the morning, I couldn't find anybody who thought that this wasn't going to sink Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation, as Dr. Ford essentially gave credible, emotional, authentic testimony to what she experienced. But you saw an angry Lindsey Graham come out of that first half of the hearing into the hallways, talking very sharply, and then you saw Brett Kavanaugh, and Lindsey Graham ultimately kind of decided to dispense with that the way that they had set up the forum, and instead take it directly to a pretty wide audience. And when he walked in to the all-Republican conference meeting tonight at the Capitol, he was met with loud applause from his colleagues. And I think that really underscores to you that they have rallied around Brett Kavanaugh. So I feel like I've said this time and time again over the course of the last week or two now, but this really is going to come down to these two women Republican senators. Is this a moment, is the cultural moment that they're in one where they feel like they have to make a different decision? from the vast majority of their colleagues who right now are prepared to vote yes on Judge Kavanaugh. This is a historic decision for them. I think John Meacham, who you're going to talk to later on in the show, says this is the kind of decision that dictates what people think when they look up at your oil painting. And considering the cultural moment, I think that's weighing very heavily, Lawrence.
Hallie Jackson, what's the situation at the White House tonight?
Well, the president, Lawrence, finds himself in a position that, frankly, he doesn't always like. Spectator. Because while the president has made very clear that he stands behind Brett Kavanaugh, that Brett Kavanaugh is his guy, that he will not, in fact, walk away from this nomination, ultimately, the president can give all the support in the world and it won't matter unless those 3 Republicans that Casey just talked about come on board, too. And here's the problem for the president. I've had a couple of conversations over the last 25 minutes or so talking through some of this. The president, as you know, does not have a relationship with Senator Jeff Flake. That relationship is toast, right? So that's gone. He does not have a particularly positive relationship with Susan Collins or with Lisa Murkowski. It's not like he's going to be able to get on the phone. And if he is, they, frankly, are not going to find that particularly persuasive coming from President Trump. They have other considerations that they're taking in as they decide where they go on this front. So the president can get out there, and this is the lever that he does have to pull, and try to persuade public opinion by being very vocal to his base, by getting out there and tweeting like he did about 45 seconds after that hearing wrapped up tonight, blaming Democrats and demanding that senators vote. He can call, for example, Mitch McConnell or Chuck Grassley or his allies over on the Hill and tell them that he wants to get this done. He knows exactly what is riding on this. And I'll tell you, you talk about the arc that we've seen over the last 24 hours and these reports of grim pessimism midway through the day today. That's because the people that I was talking to in and around that room were grim and they were pessimistic. They knew that so much was riding on Judge Brett Kavanaugh's opening statement. I am told that the president was particularly pleased with that, that search and destroy line, not advising consent. You can bet he took notice. So at this point, the action is really not at the White House. It's down Pennsylvania Avenue, Lawrence.
Joining our discussion now, Andrea Mitchell, NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent and host of Andrea Mitchell Reports on MSNBC, and Nina Totenberg, legal affairs correspondent for NPR. Andrea, I know you've seen it all in the United States Senate, and now you added another chapter to the You've Seen It All memoir.
And it really, for the senators, for the audience, for the American people, it's a stomach-churning chapter because it's a he said, she said, as it was 27 years ago. There were senators who said, as Jeff Flake was saying to my colleague Casey Hunt, they are conflicted. They don't know what to do. The obvious pressure is on those Republicans and some Democrats from red states who assumed would vote to confirm because of their races are on the line there. But the fact that we saw the senators on the panel going after each other, Lindsey Graham, the cheers that he got from the Republican caucus, but there was a moment there was shock and applause in the eyes and in the affect of some of the Republicans, but a lot of shock because usually, as you know, as a former chief of staff over there, my good friend, the gentleman from such and such, and this was none of that. And even at the Thomas Hill hearings 27 years ago that I covered, there was a lot of anger, but it was never this kind of visceral breaking of the system. And the other piece of it is that his opening statement was so fiery and so, exactly what the White House clearly wanted, what the president wanted to hear. We first saw a tweet from Don Jr., which was the tip-off also as to what the president was going to tweet immediately afterwards. But he broke some china there. And Nina has a better perspective on this than I, the institutionalist that she is, of the court and its history and of the judiciary. But it's one thing to come in and accuse the Democrats of holding back, covering up, coming in late. But there were a couple of things he did to bring up the Clintons and the 2016 campaign and a left-wing conspiracy in the context of politics. I know a lot of the justices. I've been around Washington long enough. The Republicans, the Democrats, they socialized together beyond the legendary Scalia-Ginsburg relationship. It's hard to imagine if, and when he is confirmed, and certainly they could well have the votes, how he fits into the conference, how he fits into their discussions. Collegiality is terribly important. And he has gone political in his self-defense, a measure of his pain. But it was the high-tech lynching moment that, with Clarence Thomas, did turn public opinion and the momentum in Thomas's favor. And this may well have done the same.
Nina Totenberg, you've covered the Supreme Court. You've seen many a Supreme Court confirmation hearing. This one was unlike any we've seen before. There are parallels to Clarence Thomas, but it is different in so many ways. Your reaction to what you saw today?
Well, this was such a more political defense that Kavanaugh undertook on his own behalf, putting aside his great emotion and passion, which is to some extent understandable if you have been falsely accused, which he maintains he has been falsely accused, that he did not do this, that this never happened. But just for a second, put that aside and remember that he's going to become, if he's confirmed, a justice on the United States Supreme Court for decades. And as much as cabinet appointments can be very political, Supreme Court nominations are political sub rosa. The nominee isn't supposed to engage in partisan politics, but he sounded like he was in a campaign. And he, in fact, said this is the revenge of the Clintons, going back, I suppose, to his days working for Ken Starr investigating President Clinton, which led to his impeachment.
Yeah, it was a speech, Andrea, he was very proud of having written himself. I want to go to a moment here where Dr. Ford testified about what she called the indelible memories of what she says happened to her. And she remained, even throughout this testimony, the professional psychological clinician that she is. Let's listen to this.
Indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two, and they're having fun at my expense.
You've never forgotten that laughter. You've never forgotten them laughing at you.
They were laughing with each other.
And you were the object of the laughter?
I was, underneath one of them while the two laughed. Two friends having a really good time with one another.
Andrea, under that pressure, in that question of what do you remember most, she actually references the center of the brain where that information's processed.
And the reaction, I was on set at that moment on the air with some of our colleagues, Mika Rocha and Joyce, both former prosecutors, and Dan Goldman. And their response as former prosecutors was that she was the best witness that they could have imagined, because she was an expert witness as well as a fact witness of what she could remember. She didn't speak beyond what she could remember. She acknowledged what she doesn't. But those former prosecutors, and some have handled these sex cases, said that she remembered the moment, not necessarily as she was being questioned by Rachel Mitchell about what she heard or didn't hear as she heard them talking as they went down the steps, but she remembered very clearly the laughter and the eye contact with Mark Judge. And what they could not get past in the response was the refusal to call Mark Judge a witness who was in the room, which is the first thing you would want to do.
Let's listen to what Jeff Flake said today in the hearing room. And remember, he is the one possible swing vote in the Judiciary Committee. Let's listen to what he said about doubt.
In the end, there is likely to be as much doubt as certainty going out of this room today. There is doubt. We'll never move beyond that.
So there's Senator Flake saying there is doubt and we will never move beyond that. Let's listen to what President Trump said last week about how much doubt there should be.
I feel that the Republicans, and I can speak for myself, we should go through a process, because there shouldn't even be a little doubt. There shouldn't be a doubt.
Nina Totenberg, that goes to one of the issues never resolved in the Clarence Thomas hearing, and that is, what is the correct standard of proof in a situation like this? President Trump announced the standard of proof last week should be that there is absolutely no doubt about Brett Kavanaugh. There's no doubt about the possibility that he did what Dr. Ford says. And there's Jeff Flake saying that he will have doubt, that when this, that meaning tonight, that he has doubt about the credibility of Brett Kavanaugh.
Well, I think Jeff Flake is probably closer to the truth. People may retreat to their corners with the he saids and the she saids, but in the end, there will always be doubt among some people, and maybe even many people. I mean, the fact is that this hearing today was very much, actually, in a grand sense, like the Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill hearing, in the sense that after the morning, I was sitting in a live on the air with filling in for the break with a bunch of other observers and journalists, all of whom thought that essentially he was toast. And I reminded them that we thought Clarence Thomas was toast, and he wasn't. You can sometimes bull your way through these things if you're just tough enough and mean enough. And the only question I have is whether 27 years makes enough of a difference. I mean, after all, in those days, the Democrats actually controlled the Senate. Today, the Republicans control the Senate.
Casey Hunt, Mitch McConnell has said that before we even got to this hearing, that he fully intended to ram this through. That was basically the way he talked about it. And tomorrow morning, if Jeff Flake were to say that he needs an FBI investigation before he casts his vote, that could stop it in the committee.
It could, Lawrence, although the reality is there's kind of only one scenario whereby Jeff Flake could stand in the way. They could they would force a vote where the whole Senate would have to overrule and strip the jurisdiction of the committee. It's way down in the procedural weeds, but we have seen Mitch McConnell blow through those rules changes around the Supreme Court nominees. I don't think there's a perception that he would hesitate to do that again. So I would look at the committee as a significant weather vane, and if Jeff Flake is willing to stand up in committee, that could tell you a lot about what would happen on the full Senate floor. It could possibly precipitate a withdrawal, but I wouldn't look at it as, if the committee doesn't pass it or they don't send it out with a recommendation, that's the end of Judge Kavanaugh. I mean, Mitch McConnell has devoted his entire political life to executing what you are potentially about to see Republicans do. He has dedicated himself to changing the balance on the court. This seat will do it for a generation. He has called stopping Merrick Garland his greatest, most significant political accomplishment. And that is why you are seeing what is a very transparent strategy from McConnell. He has tried to create an aura of inevitability around Kavanaugh, and he is forcing his colleagues to not take very much time to think about this. I do think there's a perception that the longer people have to sit with the story that Dr. Ford told today, that quite frankly, the way that Kavanaugh approached it might not age well. And so it's in their interest to get this done absolutely as soon as possible. And right now, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about doing the first major procedural vote. You will know the phrase motion to proceed, Lawrence, although our audience should understand it as a key procedural vote. They're talking about doing that on Saturday.
Hallie Jackson, the Republicans in the Senate, no doubt, are hoping that the president stays silent, since the odds of the president saying something helpful are not particularly good.
Well, the president has said a lot already, Lawrence, and if they're hoping for him to stay silent, they may not want to peek at what's coming up this weekend when the president gets back out on the campaign trail in West Virginia, no less. And you have seen those rallies before. It is the very definition of Donald Trump unscripted. And given that this has been such a central focus point for him today, you know that is what is going to continue over the next 48 hours or so, particularly if things, as Casey's talking about, come to a head on Saturday. Remember just how much the president was focused on this. He was watching it on Air Force One, 30,000 feet, all the way to the residence behind me all day long, clearing his schedule, delaying a meeting with his deputy attorney general, the guy who oversees the special counsel investigation, maybe going to fire him, maybe accept his resignation, maybe keep him on. That's been pushed off now for a matter of days so that the president could give his entire focus to not just watching Christine Blasey Ford, but watching how Brett Kavanaugh did. The president is pleased, but is that enough? We're about to find out.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.